Welcome back to the Situational Citizen. Let's talk guns. First of all, I want to go ahead and give you all a huge thank you. All the people who stopped by and watched my first video, give it a like, give it a comment. You're what make this all possible, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and start off with a new series, basically Pistol 101, or buying and purchasing your first gun. All the way up to, at the end of the series, should be able to draw and utilize or fire your gun in a most efficient manner. This video will be geared mostly towards first-time buyers, but there will be different considerations, different information that people who already own firearms can use for their future firearm purchases, or those same people can also give information towards family members and friends who might be also looking to buy a future firearm or their first firearm as well. So the first thing that we're going to consider is, why are you buying your first gun? I do understand there's a lot of things going on in the world right now. It's been going on for several years where crime has been increasing, break-ins have been increasing, and you might be on the fence about buying your first gun. Or if you already own a firearm, you might be looking at buying a different one than one you already have. Different considerations you might be buying your first-time firearm or a future firearm are home defense, personal defense, competition, duty use, or just practice. Keep in mind that a lot of things can fill multiple roles at one time. They don't only have to be one role for one gun. When you're buying your first firearm, the first thing I'm actually going to go ahead and cover is, are you a man or are you a woman? We don't trust the science around here, but there are major differences between men and women when purchasing a firearm. The first thing we're going to go ahead and look at is the difference between men and women is your hand size. This will actually have a great impact on the amount of purchase you can get on the firearm. Men's hands tend to be much larger than women's hands. It's just a fact. So this will actually help with recoil control. When your hands are smaller and you can't get as much purchase on the handgun, you will actually end up inducing malfunctions because you will not be able to get as much of a purchase on the handgun. And that is something to take into account when you are buying your first handgun. One of the other things, if you plan on carrying this on your person and you're a man or a woman, your body type will change. Also, men and women tend to dress a little differently. Men will be able to conceal a pistol on their person a little bit better, where women will be able to conceal a pistol maybe in an accessory or so a little bit better, just because of the clothing types that we do carry. So keep in mind the size of a pistol that you plan on purchasing, if you plan on concealed carrying, if you're a man or a woman. One of the main things we're gonna talk about here when considering buying a pistol, let's be honest, is cost. Most people don't want to break the bank on purchasing a firearm, but luckily most popular striker fire pistols, like any of these you see here, are going to be roughly in the $400 to $600 range. Obviously, some of them will be higher, and depending on what you put into it will obviously increase the price of it. But stock, most of these guns will come somewhere in the vicinity of around the $500 to $600 mark. So the typical Glock 19, like I have right here, was a typical Glock 19, sorry, but I believe those run just barely below $600 on maybe MSRP right now in the year of 2023. The Smith & Wesson was roughly around the $500 to $600 mark. And this SIG, if you were going to get a different SIG than the actual Macro, then maybe the 365 XL, also run around $600. One thing that will come into effect with the pricing is more and more handguns are actually coming with the ability to be modified, such as accessory rails and cuts for red dot sights into the slide. That will actually end up increasing the price, but most firearms are actually coming with that from the factory, and they're just kind of including it anyways. It won't affect the price too much. Maybe they've increased an additional $50 or so just for being able to effectively carry a red dot sight or an MOS cut. One of the other things we're also going to cover is where you live. Unfortunately, not every state is equal. They should be under the Constitution, but unfortunately that's not the world we live in. So one of the things you do have to consider is the state you live in, the laws you have to follow, and what you are allowed to carry and what you can't. Some states like New York, New Jersey, California, you might just not be able to own a firearm. Or you can own a firearm, but they make it exceptionally hard to own a firearm. Make sure you always follow the laws of your state. Unfortunately, again, all gun laws are an infringement in my opinion, but while you have to, do follow the laws of your state. Kind of overlapping with the size of your hand and if you're a male or female, are ergonomics of the firearm. What feels best for you? Every gun's minutely slightly different due to the caliber, due to the grip angle, due to the manufacturer. So you can actually see that if you were to purchase a Glock compared to a Sig, there are minute little differences here to the grip angle. The grip angle itself right here on a Sig compared to a Glock is going to be a slight angle. I believe it's about 13 degrees difference or so. You won't notice it too much looking at this, but you will notice it when you actually have to fire it in your hand. The actual Sig itself has a more natural point of aim where you're actually pointing with more so your knuckles are going to be pointing at the thing because it's got a more upright grip angle, whereas a Glock you'll be more pointing with your thumbs because you'll have to drive that gun a little bit further forward because of the steep grip angle on the actual gun. That's one thing you do want to consider when controlling your recoil itself is, do you want natural point of aim or do you want more a steep angle where you actually drive your wrists a little bit further forward and lock them into place when you're firing your firearm? One of the biggest misconceptions about purchasing a firearm between men and women or big and small is most people, especially women, will tend to go for a smaller firearm, such as this. This is actually my wife's pistol. So it is incredibly small. My wife is a tiny lady, so this actually kind of does fit her. But the problem with owning a smaller pistol is they do in fact induce malfunctions easier themselves. So if you are actually a woman with concealed carry or wanting to carry that might be good for you. But if you're searching for a home defense gun and you're a woman, I would actually go more so as on a full-size pistol, such as this M&P Core. Because again, one, you're gonna have more rounds in the thing, and it's easier to control, believe it or not, for even a woman with smaller hands. Because of the weight, that'll be actually forcing the barrel down, and simultaneously the length of the barrel and the slide itself is heavier, and it actually will throw itself forward harder when a woman is holding onto it, that it actually reduces the amount of malfunctions that a woman might have if they can't get as much meat or palms on the actual surface of the handgun itself. It's almost like a self-correcting problem. That's one of the things again. So if you are actually considering home defense guns themselves, I would probably stick to about like this area. I would want a larger pistol with a slightly longer barrel itself, because the barrel length is mainly affecting velocity. Its weight on the front of the gun keeps your muzzle down when you're actually firing the gun, and the recoil itself, more weight on the front of the gun, oscillating recoil or muzzle flip itself. But the length of the barrel does increase velocity. When we're looking at minute differences between barrel length with a 3.1 barrel all the way to about a 5-inch barrel, we're not looking at a drastic increase of muzzle velocity itself. We're probably looking about 100 to 200 at most. But what you are looking forward to with a home defense gun with a larger thing is more so control and magazine capacity. If you sleep with this next to your bedside or so, you want more rounds just on hand. Something goes bump in the night, the last thing you want to do is A, reload, or 2, look for a backup magazine if you need it. Concealed carry is a different story. If you're a man, I would kind of stick in this area itself. If you're a woman, possibly here, but this would actually work for a woman as well, this area. We're actually looking at more full size. This would be considered the compact area, and this would be considered the subcompact area. If you're looking to conceal carry, the most common gun people carry is the Glock 19. It's the most versatile, it's very reliable, it's fairly inexpensive, and you can find it anywhere. You can find parts for it anywhere, and ammunition mainly runs through it pretty well. Sig, on the other hand, is popping up more and more and more as being more versatile, also super reliable. They have had a few issues with a 320, but that's neither here nor there. You will be able to mod these out a little bit better. They're jumping on the game of being able to be modded out, and they are actually a little bit easier to carry than a Glock 19. Another thing to consider is weight. When you're concealed carrying, you've got a 3-pound piece of metal basically shoved in your pants. It's not comfortable. Nobody says it's going to, but you have to kind of deal with it as best as possible and make it as comfortable as possible. So most guns these days that you're going to be able to buy in this range are going to be a combination between polymer and steel. That does cut down some of the weight if you want to you can get full steel frames or so, but you will actually end up increasing the price of your firearm if you go full steel. If you don't choose to put a red dot sight on your gun itself, or if it doesn't come with an MOS cut, one thing that will be a make or break for you are the iron sights on the actual gun itself. Most guns these days do or should come with some sort of night sight, like you will see on the back of this Sig. These are night sights, they're tritium. They glow in the dark. They actually are pretty unobtrusive during the daytime as well, comparatively to a set of stock Glock sights, which is the typical U dot thing that they did. I don't know why they did it. It's hideous. I don't believe I've met a single human being that likes the typical stock Glock sights at all. But if you see what I have done, because Glock is actually a very popular gun, is I actually have modded this Glock sights to be suppressor height sights with also the tritium, some night sights, and they are also fairly unobtrusive, and they no longer have that silly U sight such as these do. But sights are going to be a big deal because that's what you use to aim your gun. So that's something to consider is, are you ever going to put a red dot on it? Are you going to put a flashlight on it? If not, you might want to go ahead and figure out if the gun comes with night sights on it. One thing you will not see here, because I just don't own one, is a wheel gun or a revolver of some sort. Nothing against revolvers. People find them, they're actually small, can be smaller than this, like I believe the Ruger LCP, if that's what it's called. Nothing against them, I just don't personally own them. They are extremely reliable. If you own a wheel gun or a revolver, more power to you. I just don't happen to own one at any point. If that's what you want to carry because they're smaller, they actually can carry different calibers of rounds than most of these actual striker fired, and that's one for when you want to choose. For instance, backcountry, and you want to carry a 44 Magnum because you come across bear a lot, more power to you. I just don't happen to own one. But that is also a consideration. Are you also using these guns simultaneously for home defense, or are you a hunter and you want to carry this gun specifically in case you come across a mountain lion, or you come across a bear, or you come across something else? That might be a consideration of the caliber of the type of gun you carry as well. Most guns you see on this table actually are all one caliber, 9mm, except for this one right here and this one right here. 9mm is my preferred round. The technology behind 9mm is almost surpassed in capability of similar home defense rounds people would use, like a 45 ACP or 40 Smith Wesson, which is actually what this is. I actually used this for the longest time back before I switched to 9mm quite a bit, because this used to be my only pistol, and I thought 40 was awesome, and now 9mm has basically surpassed it. The big thing is with 9mm that I believe is the surpassing force is the fact that it can carry more, and capacity is king, in my opinion, especially for home defense, personal defense, duty use, and especially even competition. If you want to use competition, well, reloading less is pretty important. But I do use this 40 caliber in the backwoods. I should probably switch to a 10 mil. That's down the road or so, but at the time being, this is my backcountry kind of pistol. The other pistol that is actually smaller is this one. This is a 380 auto or a 380 ACP. This is my wife's gun. It is easier to control for her. But keep in mind, when you are going with a larger caliber, you will sacrifice capacity. And again, like I said, I believe capacity is king. Having more ammunition is better than having less ammunition, even if the round is smaller. If you run out of ammo, you've lost the fight. One of the last things I'm going to cover when considering purchasing your first firearm or a future firearm is the popularity of the gun. If you're buying an obscure brand, you might not find a holster for it. Whereas the big three, Smith Wesson, Glock, Sig, you can find a holster anywhere for it. And you will need a holster for this gun. If you plan on keeping it next to your bedside, you plan on using it for duty use, you plan on using it for competition, and most importantly, you plan on using it for concealed carry, you will absolutely need a holster for it immediately, pretty much. Simultaneously, the popularity of the gun will also dictate the accessories you will get for a holster and B, the gun itself. So therefore, you can see with this Glock, this has been heavily modded out. I've done almost replaced pretty much everything in this gun. There's almost not a single stock part in this gun itself anymore. And some of the companies that are starting to jump on that bandwagon is Sig. Sig is becoming heavily modified. In fact, I would say almost more so with the fact that they have the fire control unit on the inside, where you can actually take the fire control unit, which is actually the registered part of the firearm, pull it out and put it into a number of different frames and completely change the look, feel of your firearm by just replacing the fire control unit and then redoing everything. Where a Glock doesn't have that ability, but they do have an incredible amount of aftermarket parts, and they're easy to work on. You can find almost any YouTube channel out there that actually shows you how to even just pull things like little pins like I did here, all the way up to changing out the entire trigger and striker system inside of the actual slide. After you've purchased your first firearm, the next thing you're going to go ahead and buy is ammunition. You gotta feed it. So considerations when going over your ammo type is, again, practice, going to the range, self-defense, duty. All these are things are going to be considered in the type of ammunition you carry. The first thing you're obviously going to consider, caliber. Are you going to go with a 9mm? You're going to go with a smaller 380? You're going to go with a larger 40 caliber, even larger 45? Or if you're going out in the woods, maybe a 10mm 44 Magnum, or something to the effect of like a 357 Magnum. Whatever ammunition you're picking, you're going to take a few things into consideration. One, what kind of home do you live in? Do you live in an apartment building? Do you live in the middle of nowhere? Do you live in a small suburb? That's one thing you really have to take into consideration. God forbid if you ever have to use this firearm in self-defense, you do not want this thing to go through a wall and hit somebody else. If you live out in the middle of nowhere, like somewhere in Great Plains of Wyoming, or somewhere in Montana like I do, or somewhere else in Idaho or something, you might not have to consider the fact that your bullets might go through and hit another person's house. But if you do live in a suburb, or you live in an apartment building, or you live in a bigger city, but you're still allowed to carry firearms, or you work in an office building, but you do carry a firearm, you want to consider bullets go through walls, and you do not want them to pass through them if you can help it. You do want your round to have some minor barrier defeating capabilities. Things that are considered barriers are just even your clothing. If someone's wearing a leather jacket and a sweatshirt underneath it in the dead of winter or so, sometimes that might even slow down a 22 to the point it won't penetrate through. Or maybe even something as small as this 380, whereas a 9mm that actually has more powder behind it could penetrate through that. Other things you'll come across that are barriers. Let's say you are in a convenience store and somebody gets in a gunfight. It happens more so than you think in actually big cities. Food, water, and even the aisles that you have to kind of hide behind, you might actually have to end up shooting through that if you need to. Last but not least, drywall in your own home. That is a barrier. Bullets will pass through it. Even these hollow points that are meant to actually slow down and fragment, they can pass through your drywall. You just want them to slow down as much as possible going through your drywall where they won't hurt another person on the other side. If you have to, unfortunately, use your firearm in a home defense situation and you have kids, the last thing, the worst nightmare you have is shooting through a wall, even remotely close towards your kid's room. That's the last case scenario you ever want anything to happen. So having a round that'll actually go through a person, but not through the other side of the wall, or won't hurt another person on the other side of the wall by the time it actually gets there, might be the best decision for you. If you actually are using this as a backcountry gun itself, you do not want to use hollow points. Animals have thicker hides than human beings. Our skin may be pretty resilient, but it's not anywhere remotely as tough as the hide of an animal. So using something that actually slows down once it hits an actual barrier, we don't want that. We want to use or carry more so a ball tip round or a full metal jacket round itself, because these will penetrate through barriers better than something that actually is meant to mushroom or flower the moment it hits something. The whole entire reason we're carrying a gun in the first place is to defend ourselves. So each one of these is going to cause a different wound channel or cavitation while it passes through soft tissue or barrier, mostly soft tissue. You'll be able to find anywhere on the internet, mostly people shooting the ballistics gel with a lot of these rounds, showing the cavitation, or in other words, once the round actually impacts, the damage it would do to soft tissue on the inside, which is called a wound channel. So things like this ball round would actually do a smaller wound channel while simultaneously continuing to travel through, whereas something else like this Hydroshock will maybe not pass through at that gel, but it will cause a much larger wound channel. When you're purchasing your ammo, cost also comes into effect. Things like the Critical Duty are going to be a little bit more pricey, I believe, than coming across something like maybe your Federal Hydroshocks or FSTs or things like that. They're roughly going to be similar in price. They're not going to be too drastically expensive, but you will come into cost differences, especially between something like a self-defense ammunition and your typical full metal jacket ammunition. Along to go with price is availability. These are going to be kept less in stock at some of these stores than your large bulk full metal jacket rounds. You'll be able to find them easier. You'll be able to purchase them easier. I know we went through a big ammunition scare a few years ago, but you are still relatively able to find 9mm full metal jacket rounds almost anywhere for not the best price, but you could still afford it. But one thing I could not find during that time period is more self-defensive ammo. That just basically vanished off the shelves. Could also, again, which is why I always keep a fair amount of it on hand. It's good to always have two different types of ammunition. You're going to have more than likely your carry ammunition, and you're going to have probably something like practice ammunition itself. You can carry practice ammunition. There are a lot of people who do. They just buy one round and they use it for everything. Or if you don't want to go ahead and punch through walls, or you want to create more of a wound channel on somebody, you'll have two different types of ammunition. I don't recommend shooting a bunch of your carry ammunition just cause if you have practice ammo, if you're going to be target practicing, because it gets very expensive. And if they decide to like not have a lot of it in stock, then you might burn all your carry ammunition and then you don't have anything you have to develop, or you actually have to go back to practice ammunition to begin with. One thing you do have to do though, you do have to shoot your carry ammo. You have to shoot it at least somewhat regularly. There's a thing called zero shift. So you may end up zeroing in a red dot sight like this Hollow Sun or this Vortex to get roughly about a 10-yard zero, maybe somewhere 10-12 yards. It's halfway between being face to face with a target and all the way out to 25 yards, where most engagements with a pistol will happen. If you go past that, it's capable of it, but I prefer not to actually have to shoot that far if I can help it. But you will have to zero it. I usually end up zeroing it, mostly getting it on paper and actually pretty accurately with practice ammunition, because I can burn most of it. But then once I get it on paper, I will specifically zero it to my carry ammunition, because this is the one that's going to be the moneymaker. This is the one I carry. This is the one, if I ever get in a situation, I'm going to be using. This is the one I want to know is actually hitting more accurately compared to that. So you have to watch out for zero shift when you actually, because again, this is this is 115 grain round. It's smaller, it's lighter than this 135 grain plus P round. It's heavier. It will actually affect its ballistics just slightly, but it's enough that you want to make sure this round is doing what you want compared to this round. Differences also with your carry ammunition and your bulk or practice ammunition is quality itself. These are going to have higher quality control than your practice ammunition or your bulk ammunition itself. You do not want to have a light primer strike. Things happen where the ammunition gets cheaper and you could possibly get some light primer strikes where basically the striker hits the actual primer, doesn't detonate, and the round doesn't go forward like it's intended to. Whereas this better ammunition, you will see that less and less and less likely. You will actually start to run into that a little bit if you start modding out a lot of your products, doing aftermarket triggers and strikers itself. Like this trigger right here, it's called the Pyramid. It did not work in this gun, which I originally got it in. I would get light primer strikes all day long, but I actually had a couple stock triggers, put it into this 40, and this is such a heavy hitting round that I don't have light primer strikes anymore until I was able to pick up a different aftermarket trigger in this. That works perfectly fine. Grain weight will also differentiate between things like practice ammunition or the caliber of the round. This is a 180 grain big bore round. This is what I actually use when I am hunting or out backpacking or camping. This is actually designed specifically for big game animals. So it's going to be a heavier round. It's 180 grain. This is the one I carry. This is 135 grain plus P. And this is the ammunition I train with, which is 115 grain. Grain itself is just a form of weight for bullets themselves. They are it's a very, very, very small unit of measurement. It's about 1/1000th of a pound, I believe, off the top of my head. But grain will in fact affect your speed of the round coming out. The heavier the grain, the slower it's going to travel. So this 175 grain or this 180 grain will travel a lot slower than this 115 grain or even this 90 grain round right here. They will be traveling at a significantly faster pace. Simultaneously, you can also affect that by your barrel length. With grain weight comes impact, or the actual kinetic energy displacement of the actual round itself. So this 175 grain and this 135 grain will have different kinetic energy displacement. This will hit harder, whereas this will not, because there's just more mass behind it. Science. Lastly, when you're buying your round is of the caliber that you choose, recoil. This will recoil harder than this. Given it's a larger round, it has more powder behind it, it will kick harder than it will the 9mm, the 380. If you go up further and further in calibers of rounds, you will get more and more recoil. That's one thing you want to consider also when you're purchasing. Originally, the gun you want is also the ammunition type you want. How much recoil do you want? How much impact do you want? How much speed do you want? These are all things that you would consider. And in an overview of what we've considered through this whole video itself, when you purchase your first firearm or purchase your first handgun, I'll be taking a lot of these considerations. I probably missed a few. You can go ahead and let me know in the comments below. But as an overview, these are a lot of things to consider when buying your first firearm, all the way down from the ammunition you carry. If you like what you saw here today, go ahead and give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a comment down below so I can go ahead and continue on with this series. And again, be safe. And if you can't be safe, be deadly.